favor, tomen asiento. Vamos a comenzar. Gracias.
We're going to begin. Please take your seats.
Excelentísimas e ilustrísimas autoridades, señoras y señores, benvinguts.
Distinguished authorities, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. As President of Nueva Economía Forum, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Tribuna Catalunya of the Fórum Europa that we do together with Asistencia Santander and Red Eléctrica de España. Today we have the special honor of having here as one of our speakers Mr. Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament and Socialist candidate for the President of the European Commission. He will be presented by Mr. Javier Solana, who was, among other important positions, the High Representative of the Union for External Affairs, for Foreign Affairs. Today we have simultaneous interpreting on Channel 1 Catalan, on Channel 2 Spanish, and English will be on Channel 3. Mr. Solana, the floor is yours.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning to everyone. I would like my first words to be words of gratitude to the organizers for giving me this opportunity of being here in Barcelona once again. I come here frequently and I enjoy coming and I enjoy being invited to come, and most of all to have the opportunity of presenting a good friend, Mr. Martin Schulz, one of the most brilliant people that exists in the European scenario. I met Martin Schulz many years ago. I was the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Spain at that time, and from the very start of our meeting we established a wonderful friendship. Martin Schulz is a person with extraordinary energy, a man with great passion for Europe, of the highest level, a man that's extremely intelligent, and a man that has solidarity and that wants to protect those great values of Europe. He has been mayor for 11 years of a beautiful area of Germany, the area of Aquisgrán. I remember when I was taken to Aquisgrán, the wonderful places and the walks that I took with Martin Schulz. And then I was member of the European Parliament. He was member of the European Parliament, and since he got there, everyone knew that he was there. He was the spokesperson, the speaker for the Union, and he now has the responsibility of taking forward the Social Democrats' candidature forward. These elections are essential for Europe, not only because we are going to begin to see how we leave the crisis and the construction of a strong Europe, but it is essential. It is the institution that coincides, and it's a chamber that's extremely important, and for the first time the person that leads the European Parliament that wins in the elections will be the President of the Commission. So for the first time there's a legitimization process. We're giving an important step forward in how the different roles are chosen that will lead Europe in this time, and we have the good fortune of being with one of them that's already been chosen. I can say that he will be the candidate. We have already closed the possibility for other candidates, so it will be him, and so you will be hearing from the next President of the European Commission. So it is a very important moment, and you're going to be hearing the upcoming President of the European Commission. Well, 2014 is going to be a transcendental year for many reasons. Europe has serious problems. We have to exit those problems. We have to be able to look towards the future. And 2014 is the anniversary of many things. For you in Catalonia, there are some; for the Europeans, others. 2014 are 100 years since the First World War. The First World War, without a doubt, is in the heart of Europeans because of the suffering of so many, and we can never return to a situation like that among us. And what is done by the Europeans and the elections in 2014 will be an example of commitment, and a commitment to the future, and so that what happened in the past never happens. A world where we need to work together as Europeans, and if we do not, we will not have the strength that we have had in our recent history, and we will not be able to continue with the weight that we have. So the union, solidarity, the values of Europeans have to be maintained, and these elections are the ideal moment to begin that. There can be some people that are disappointed, people that are angry, people that are sad. There can be people that would have liked to have seen more things, but if we're not capable of doing it in these elections, none of that will be able to get fixed. And so this is a call to our collective common sense, so that we can go and use these elections as a step forward in the European construction. We have the privilege then of having with us Martin Schulz, a grand European defender, and he has a man of great passion, of great energy, a great speaker, and committed to all of these values that we want to defend. So Martin, it's your turn.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Bon dia, buenos dias, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For all German-speaking people, guten Morgen. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, Javier, for the warm welcome. Thank you very much for the description of our long-lasting friendship. We met for the first time in reality, as he mentioned, 1995. I think I had more years in 1995 on my head than today. So it's some years ago. And I see just my colleague Gasoliba Iböhm, who was sitting beside me in my first session in the European Parliament. We were neighbors when we listened to the then President of the Council in Office, Javier Solana. So, long times ago, and a lot changed since then in the European Union. And that's why it's perhaps useful to start with a reference to history. I must tell you, I never could imagine 20 years ago, when I was elected as a young member of the European Parliament, the new elected member of the European Parliament, the time I was still, as Javier mentioned, mayor in Germany, I could never imagine that one day in the European Union somebody could raise a question to me. As a young girl, did it just 2 weeks ago in Strasbourg. I spent a visit to a school in Strasbourg, and I discussed with young men and women, young students learning German, 17, 18, 19 years old, and this young girl raised the following question: how can you run for a post in Europe you are a German. My answer was, why not? Yeah, because you are German. The young girl had a lot of difficulties to explain to me by arguments why a German should not run for a senior post in the European Union. But it was for me quite interesting that a young girl, born in a time when I was already member of the European Parliament, so belonging to a generation of which we think Europe is a normal thing and it doesn't matter if you are a Portuguese or a Finnish, a Maltese or a Polish, an Austrian or an Irish, or a German or a Greek. That we are living in a European Union where the nationality matters more in the eyes of people than your competences or your political affiliation or your opinions and proposals for the solution of the problems. But this is the reality. How you can run for a post you are a Greek. How you can run for a post you are a German. The prejudice is all Greeks are incompetent. Or all Germans are thinking like, let's say, the Deutsche Bank. This is an enormous risk. And we are living just in such times. Therefore, I think, and thank you very much, Javier, to make this reference to my ambition to become a candidate of my political party for the next upcoming European election. But I'm here not as a candidate of the Social Democrats in Europe. I'm here as the President of the European Parliament, and as President of an institution, as a President of 754 members from 28 different countries, with 7 different parliamentarian groups and around 40 non-attached members, 754 parliamentarians adopting binding law for 500 million citizens on our continent, as representative, as speaker, as president of an institution representing a spirit, the idea of Europe. The idea of Europe is that countries and nations across borders cooperate in common institutions. They give themselves because they know together we are stronger than alone. Countries and nations cooperating across borders in common institutions because they know together we are strengthening each other instead to run against each other. Countries and nations cooperating in common institutions across borders. And I'm not only speaking about physical borders, the border between France and Germany, or between Italy and Austria, or Spain and France. I'm speaking also about economic borders, about cultural borders, about what separated us in the past. Countries and nations across linguistic borders cooperate because they know if we overcome the borders, which kind of borders ever, if we overcome the borders and create common institutions on equal footing, where not the big one give lessons to the smaller ones. Common institution in which the members use the institution as a frame to find a fair deal, a compromise, which is not including 100% the own requests, the own proposals, but helping to save the face for everybody. What I'm describing, ladies and gentlemen, is the idea of Europe. This is the idea of Europe and the European integration in the second half of the 20th century. And Javier remembered 1914. This was the first half of the 20th century. And I will get back to the link between 2014 and 1914 as a key year in the first half of the 20th century a little bit later. To get back a little bit later to this question, is this idea of Europe still valid? Is the idea of Europe still alive? Or is it in reality at risk and perhaps so threatened that it could fail? Because people think, he is a German, he cannot run. Or he is a Spanish or a Portuguese or a Greek. So impossible to be recognized as a European. We are facing the deepest crisis of our union, not only economically, also politically and institutionally. But one of the sources of this crisis is for sure the economic crisis of the last 5 years. Yes, it is true, we have cautious optimism. There is a slow, small growth for the first time in the euro area, 0.3%. With 0.3%, ladies and gentlemen, we need about 15 years to get back to the level of economic growth and stability of the times before the crisis. So 0.3% is not enough, but it is a beginning. And now the question is, what have we to do to make it sustainable, to make it stable? In my eyes, it is to recognize finally that this ideology we had to listen to and which had a majority during the last years in the European Council, in the Commission, not in the European Parliament, but in the two other institutions, that economic growth could only be regained by cuts in the public budgets, by reducing the sovereign debt. This philosophy of unilateral cuts in public spendings. The thesis are you must show to the markets, to the outside world, we are budgetarily disciplined, we reduce our sovereign debt, and hush, 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 the investors will get back and invest in your country. That was the proposals we heard in the European Council, more or less in the Eurogroup, more or less during 4 years. Reduce your sovereign debt and the spreads will go down. Cut in your budgets and the trust of investors will come back. And there are some countries who did it with a lot of sacrifices for their people. And the reality is the spreads went up and no investment was generated. This is a contradiction in itself. So the European Parliament, with an overwhelming majority across the political tendencies, made other suggestions. One of our suggestions is to combine budgetary discipline with strategic investment in growth, in research, in development, in infrastructure, and especially in the fight against unemployment, and here in the fight against unemployment of young people. It is for a society absolutely unbearable. It is a danger if more than 25, 30, partially 40% of young men and women younger than 25 years, partially belonging to the best educated generation the country's ever had are unemployed. This is destroying the cohesion of a society. How can I expect economic growth? How can we expect trust if we have a young generation where the parents invested everything in the education of their children? The children did whatever they could do to come as soon as possible to the end of their education, and the society has only one message: we have no place for you. This is not only a disappointment for these young people, this is a hard strike against their parents. And about what I'm speaking, ladies and gentlemen, when we are speaking about growth and employment and unemployment of young people, I want to tell you by my own example. I'm a post-war German. I'm born 1955. My parents belong to the German war generation. My parents were asked after the Second World War a lot of sacrifices. The German government asked to the generation of my parents a life which was a combination of two things: work, 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 and nothing for themselves. The first holidays my parents spent were 1970. My father was then 58 years old. Then he was the first time in his life for 10 days with his wife in holidays. They were happy. But why they did it without any comment? Because there was a promise. And that was what they told us, their children. You should have a better life than we have. We do it for the future of our children. The promise of Europe in the 50s, 60s, and even 70s of the last century was give us something, except that you have to bring sacrifices. But it is for the better life for your children. And visibly this promise was kept. They made the sacrifices, but their children had a better life. My life is incomparable with the life of my parents. My life, even the worst day of my life, would perhaps be better than the best day in the life of my parents. The wealth, the education, the security, the chances, access to the world, to information, holidays, an own house, 2 cars, my children with an academic education, whatever. You all know this. My parents even didn't dare to dream about such things for themselves, but they did it. They brought the sacrifices. Why? Because the promise, it is for the better of your children, was kept. And what are we doing in the European Union? We are asking people to do sacrifices every day. And we don't care about their children. That's the reality of Europe. And therefore, it's not a surprise for me that the young generation and the parents' generation are disappointed from the European Union. Therefore, my thesis is the fight against unemployment of young people. It's the fight for the survival of the idea of Europe. It's the fight for the survival of cohesion. And therefore, to cut only in public budgets, it's not useful. We need budgetary discipline. Yes. We need sustainable management of sovereign debts. The sovereign debts of the member states of the Eurozone are much too high. This is clear. And by the way, it is a question of solidarity between generations. What my parents, I just mentioned, what the parents of our generations left to us as sovereign debt is much less than we leave to our children. And if I speak about the future of our children, I will not that they pay and even their children have to pay for my sovereign debt. This is not acceptable. So to reduce sovereign debt is a question of solidarity between generations. But you must not be a professor in economics to understand that without growth, you will never regain a better management of your sovereign debt. This is impossible. So we must not only discuss about the spending side to reduce spendings, we must also discuss about revenues. And I'm not speaking about more taxes, to be quite clear. I know that especially small and middle enterprises can't pay more taxes, and that they have a lot of problems. And it is especially the small and middle enterprises who are employing people, not the big industrial plants. In some of the member states, you know it as I do, the enterprises between 50 and 500 employees are the stable basis, the central pillar of economy. But you know, the biggest problem for most of them in some of the member states of the Eurozone is not the tax problem. It is access to credits. The credit crunch is one of the biggest obstacles to regain economic growth. If I discuss in Italy, often in Spain or in Greece, even in France, with small and middle enterprises, they tell me we have a lot of ideas, we could do a lot of things to modernize the infrastructure, to invest in research, to invest in development of new products, to invest in an improvement of our services. We have a lot of ideas, a lot of chances, but one of our biggest problems is we have no access to credits, because the banking crisis leads to a real credit crunch. Therefore, to overcome the credit crunch is one of the biggest challenges for us in the European Union. Therefore, I'm urging, with my colleagues in the European Parliament, to bring more security and stability into the European Union, into the Eurozone, via the banking union. And the banking union means to bring security into a banking system which is partially, ladies and gentlemen, out of control. Some of our member states, also the country here, saved or has to save banks who lost billions and billions by uncontrolled speculation. And the losses then had to be covered by the taxpayers, not by the shareholders. Because the message too big to fail is not only the description of a reality, it is also politically a threat. If you don't save us, you will fail together with us. Which government, which country can escape from such a threat? Therefore, we were in a situation that we had to save banks which went down by immoral speculation, by uncontrolled speculation in a way we could never imagine. Unprecedented. We must be prudent that we are not allowing longer to some of them, which were saved by taxpayers' money and who are now getting for 0.5% interest rates money from the European Central Bank, but they don't inject the money into the real economy. They take the money and speculate once more on the international markets. This is absolutely unacceptable. Therefore, my colleagues and I in the European Parliament, with an overwhelming majority, are in favor of a very fast, concrete legislation for the banking union, with a cascade of responsibilities for a new system with concrete share of responsibility, but also with the chance to restructure and to recapitalize banks. And therefore we suggested the European Central Bank as the single supervisory mechanism. We are strongly as European Parliament in favor of a known banking fund who is paid by the banking system itself. as a kind of general assurance for banking risks, so that the banks must know riskful behavior is not covered by the taxpayers. We must guarantee itself. And until then, when between the putting in force of the single supervisory mechanism and the banking fund, the restructuring fund is available, we need a transitional solution. And this transitional solution is highly disputed, as you know. Is it possible to recapitalize banks directly, or must it be done via the state, by state aid? And to give you an example in which world we are living, I take Spain as an example. If Spain has to recapitalize banks directly, the Spanish sovereign debt, the money coming from the budget will increase enormously. An increased sovereign debt of Spain will immediately lead to a downgrade by the rating agencies. The downgrading by rating agencies leads to increased interest rates. Perhaps interest rates to be paid to banks buying state bonds, banks just saved by the Spanish state. So this is a silly situation. Therefore, what we have to do, and this is also an element of the negotiation for a new government in Germany, what we have to do is this spiral of banking debt and state debt must be broken. We must find an instrument to break it. Which kind of instrument? This is open. But that it must be an instrument which is helping both sides to save the banking system, but also to save the countries, not to become even more under pressure because they are saving the banking system. This is what we have to do, in my eyes, one of the most important challenges. And I'm sure the moment we achieve, you will see that this problem I just described, the credit crunch, will be overcome. And then access for the real economy to credits will be much easier. And the moment access to credits will be easier, we will regain investments and growth. And via investment and growth, employment. And I hope especially employment for young people, because we are creating a lost generation. I tell you a story. I met in Madrid half a year ago a young woman, 26 years old. She told me, I'm an architect and a psychologist, with 2 academic degrees, diploma. I said architect and psychologist, this is a strange combination. Why? She said the architects have no clue of psychology, therefore they build houses nobody can live in. So I thought this is perhaps true, I don't know. And the other way around, she said to me, the human scientists they know nothing about technique, but we are living in the most technical area of our history. I thought that the answer is already a reason to give a chance to such a young woman. But she told me, in my country is no place for me, I leave Spain, I go to Latin America. I didn't tell the young woman that the ambassador of the country she wants to go to told me just some days before that his country will close the borders for Europeans at the end of the year. We are the richest continent of the world, but the distribution of our wealth is so that perhaps members of the perhaps best educated generation we ever had leave our continent. And therefore I want to get back to what Javier said. Hopelessness leads to radicalization. And people are looking for a scapegoat. Who is responsible? Who are those people who brought such a situation to us? And the easiest explanation is Europe. Troika. Wherever I am, Troika. The Troika is taken by millions and millions of citizens in Europe as an anonymous power interfering directly in their daily life, but unknown. Who is it, Troika? Who are these people who are in reality governing in our country? Anonymity, austerity, hopelessness. I'm not surprised that those who tell to people, let's come to an end with the European Union, make a point behind this. Europe is responsible. Let's do it nationally, that's better. Don't pay and don't waste the money for these bureaucrats in Brussels. Those people who tell to their citizens, close the borders. Alone we are strong enough. These people are in reality playing with the future of the next generation, because in the interdependent world of the 21st century, to tell to people that Luxembourg could compete with China, this is perhaps in the frame of a joke. Jean-Claude Juncker tells always to his friends, once a year he says, I meet the president of China, Hu Jintao. And I take him then in my arms and I tell him, look, who you and me together with our 1.3 billion inhabitants, we are a real world power. And I think he's right, Luxembourg and China together is a real power. But Juncker adds always, the moment he is back in China, he has still 1.3 billion inhabitants and I'm the prime minister of 500,000 people. But parties who are telling to people national is better than European are winning voters. Not excluded that such parties win the first place in some of the member states of the European Union for the upcoming European election. And therefore we are challenged. We have to overcome these crisis elements. We must regain economic growth and employment. But we must also compete as political families in Europe, the center-right and the center-left, with own candidates about the question not yes or no to Europe. The European Union will, I give you a guarantee, still exist the day after the European election. It will not disappear because Marine Le Pen tells to the people that the European Union is useless. The European Union will be still there. The question is not yes or no to Europe. Europe exists. The question is how Europe. And the moment we have a competition between credible candidates for the succession of Mr. Barroso, who tell to people, this is my program, another one says, this is my program. I hope that all important political families, the Social Democrats, the Christian Democrats, the Liberals, the Greens, whoever, will appoint candidates to create the European election campaign in a debate about not yes or no to Germany. Listen, we had just the 22nd of September general elections in Germany. And people were not discussing yes or no to Germany. Because the 23rd of September, Germany was still there. Even if you would wish that it disappears, Germany is there. By the way, it is the same case here in this country. It is still there. It's not a question yes or no to. If Germany is going bad, you are not asking for a new country. You are asking for another government. If France is going bad, the French are not. I'm absolutely convinced that the French will not replace France by another country. Yes or no to France, but yes or no to the government. If we want to avoid that these Europe skeptics and the anti-Europeans monopolize the election campaign for their illusionary, for their unrealistic proposals, which sounds very nice, seducing, attracting, for sure, disappointed people. If we have not a competition for proposals to do it better in future, We push the disappointed people into their arms. Therefore, a democratic competition is absolutely necessary in Europe. Therefore, I think the Lisbon Treaty gives us a chance that the next President of the European Commission should be appointed by the European Parliament, together with the Council of Heads of States and Government, but not exclusively behind closed doors, negotiated between 28 Heads of States and Government by strategies and reasons nobody knows publicly. No, by an election campaign, a vote, that voters for the first time for European election have the feeling, my vote matters, I decide with. We will exclusively, this is our only chance. We can only overcome this feeling. Europe is an anonymous power. They are interfering directly in my life, but I have no influence on it. This feeling to be delivered to foreign forces. This is the point behind these populist parties. We can only fight against this if we have a normal democratic competition in Europe about the leadership of the European Union. If there is a Spanish or Catalan translation, I recommend you a book of a German writer, Florian Illies. The title is 1913. 1913. This German writer described the year, not 1914, he described the year 1930. A wonderful book. A wonderful book with some episodes. If you read it, you will really be fascinated. I'll give you a small example. The man discovered that in February 1913, Joseph Stalin, under the name Vissarionovich Chugashvili, was a political refugee in Vienna because the Tsaristic secret service was behind him. At the same time, Adolf Hitler has just arrived in Vienna, February 1913, and both men, this was known later by their biographs, had this problem to fill their days, because Hitler was an unemployed man in a house for homeless people, and Stalin lived hidden secretly in the apartment of friends. And what they did, that they described later in their memories, walking in the afternoon in the park of the Schönbrunn Castle. That's sure. In February 1913, these two men walked in the afternoons in the same park. And it's most likely that they met each other without knowing. Yes. Thank you very much. This is the most wonderful and most polite letter telling me you shouldn't now come to that, but really wonderful. Normally I get such letters with still 2 minutes, but now, Mr. President, when you like, we could begin the colloquium. Thank you very much. This is the most, really, thank you very much. I come to that. 1913. Hitler and Stalin in the park of Schönbrunn. If it is true or not, it is a nice story, and it is perhaps most likely that they met each other. But what Florian Illies describes is another thing. 1913 was culturally, economically, politically the most interdependent year of the 20th century. And therefore I quote a letter the British Foreign Affairs Minister Earl Grey wrote to the Prime Minister Asquith. a war is absolutely impossible. The German industry will fall in the arms of Wilhelm II because the losses of the German capital outside Germany, especially in our country, will be so big that the German enterprises will prevent William II to begin a war. German economic interests outside Germany were so deeply involved in the economy of other countries and the other way around that Earl Grey thought a war is impossible. That was in August 1913. Less than 1 year later, Europe was in the beginning of this 30 years lasting catastrophe of our continent, with around 100 million killed people. I'm sure we will not have a war in Europe. Or let me say, I'm quite sure, you can never exclude nothing, but I'm convinced that there will be no war. But that an interdependent world is a guarantee for everything, for all times, this is an error. And therefore I want to conclude. We are living in times where our economies, our political systems, our cultural developments and relations, and our countries are together in a kind of integration which is unprecedented, which never existed before in Europe. And we all think this is the guarantee for stability and peace for every time. And in exactly such times, a man like me is asked by an 18-year-old girl, how you can run? You are a German. That's the point we have to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Javier. Let's begin with the questions. There are quite a few. I'm going to try to put them together according to themes. Carlos Moore asked you if you think that it will be possible to approve the pillars that are remaining for the banking union before the European elections in May. The credibility of the European zone. Can the credibility of the European zone wait as long? What are the obstacles to that agreement? And do you believe that Germany and Merkel will soften her position as a result of the coalition between the CDU and your party in Germany?
This is not one question, this is a long series of questions. I try to be as brief as possible. First question, I think we need three pillars: the single supervisory mechanism, the banking rescue mechanism, and we need a transitional solution until both is in force entirely. We have as the second pillar of the banking union this banking fund where the banks have to pay into it themselves to avoid that they expand this cascade of responsibilities, this so-called bail-in cascade. But to make it applicable, we need years and years, I think around 10 years. And until then, to make it feasible that the supervisors can act and say this is a bank in risk and we must do something, we need then this rescue fund of the banks. But when it is not available in 10 years' time, what doing in the meantime? And therefore we need a transitional solution. And I think to complete the banking union, we must define this transitional solution. The transitional solution I just described is to break this spiral between banking debts and state debt, and to avoid that the support of banks via the state is increasing once more the sovereign debt. We need a mechanism. We are just discussing this in Brussels, in Strasbourg, in the frame of our legislation, and we are under pressure. Therefore, I think it plays a major role. This is not a secret in the negotiation between the German Christian Democratic Party and the German Social Democratic Party for the time being. This is, I think, this is also not a secret. One of the most delicate and difficult points for the Germans, for both parties, for my party as well. We had just yesterday, in the round of negotiations between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, I was the rapporteur on the point you just mentioned in the question. We had a first debate. Finance Minister Schäuble, Chancellor Merkel, my party leader, Mr. Gabriel, our former candidate, Peer Steinbrück, and I myself, we made a lot of observation in the frame of the debate. We have not yet a final conclusion, but I think we will continue the debate, and I can't anticipate the result. But the question, if Angela Merkel will I think it was will soften the German position. I want to be quite clear. The Germans are a very solidary nation. About the 700 billion euros we mobilized for the stability of the banking system and the euro, around 400 billion are coming from Germany. It's not so that the Germans are not involved in the security, the other way around. If you look to the annual budget of the Federal Republic of Germany, the annual budget in Germany is 310 billion euros. So the Germans are guaranteeing 400 billion euros. This is around 100 billion more than an annual budget of our country. This is not the case that the Germans are doing nothing. The question is, what are the conditions? And here we must discuss. So I defend, I have no intention to defend too much Angela Merkel. I think we must find a solution, saving the German interests on one hand without damaging the chances of other countries. This is the way we have to go. There is a lot of different opinions how the way should be. You can't soften Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel is a very soft person with a very tough policy. So let's make Angela perhaps a little bit tougher, but the policy a little bit softer. This is what we could try to do.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Pere Kalduk is asking, Mr. President, if you think that the budgets will be approved for 2014 in time for them to be in effect in January, next January. Do you think that they will be able to approve the budgets, the financial perspectives for 2014 in time?
We will adopt it in November. The last obstacles were in the negotiations about the so-called macroeconomic conditionality, which is a very specific term. I think we will find a compromise. By the way, I must get back to Angela Merkel. By the way, not at least because of a certain kind of flexibility of Merkel. We will find a compromise. Flexibility after the general elections in Germany.
Jordi Castells asked the President, the reactions in Europe because of the espionage carried out by the United States all over Europe are getting more and more serious. The explanations of Obama's government do not convince anyone, or the European Parliament that was in Washington yesterday. have the negotiations stopped for an agreement of free commerce, free trade, as you had asked, between the United States and Europe. Don't you think that because of what's happened with this espionage, the governments of the member states would need to punish, so to say, the United States for this lack of loyalty? Don't you think that if we do not have a strong response from our institutions and companies, we may seem that we are just the accomplices of the United States? And finally, have you considered the possibility of taking this complaint to the NATO? Doesn't it go against the image of Europe, the fact that Germany would step away from the others, creating its own agreement with the United States in this area of espionage?
To be honest, it's extremely difficult to be short if the questions are more or less a page of a novel. I'm not in favor to suspend the negotiations about the free trade agreement. What I said last week was, let's take some minutes and think how we can move forward. But both sides must have the chance to think a moment. And I made this observation because I thought the Americans interrupted the negotiation last time because of the shutdown of the offices. They couldn't come. And I thought that we now for one negotiation should say we cannot come has a higher legitimacy than a shutdown in the United States. If we know that our heads of government, that our institutions are spied by the Americans, if we know that we are sitting in front of them at a negotiating table, but we know they know everything what we want to say in advance. And I just heard that even they spied the Pope before the conclave. That was an interesting thing. Then I think we should, one moment, think what is our next message to our friends in the United States. I'm absolutely in favor of the free trade agreement. The free trade agreement is an enormous chance for both of us, for the Americans and for the Europeans. If in our 21st century development, the big democracies will not cooperate on an economic and on a trade level, we will face a development that authoritarian regimes, people who don't respect the single minimal social, individual, environmental standards will be more competitive than we are. Quite clear that in Asia the industrial production is much cheaper than in Europe, but why? I don't know how much shirts here in this room are produced by women and children in 15 hours working time for $0.50. If such countries are in the long run more competitive because they don't respect the standards even the United States and the Europeans define, then we will lose. Therefore, and they are increasingly powerful, such regions in the world. And if they want to get access to our markets, Spain, Germany, Italy, France alone will not deal with them on equal footing, but Europe, and Europe with the United States together, for sure. Therefore, I'm absolutely in favor. From a left-wing side, I know that this is on my political tenets, on the left side, oh God, free trade agreement with the United States, git. But I try to convince my fellow colleagues on my tenets, on the side of my tenets, this is a chance for us. But the Americans are doing everything to support those people who are against the free trade agreement. They are delivering gratis the arguments not to deal with the United States of America because they are not sharing our values, which is, by the way, wrong. In the frame of the negotiations about the SWIFT agreement, this is the transfer of bank data to the United States of America. I had the chance, as then still chairman of a political group, to go to Washington, and I was very surprised. I learned that privacy and mistrust to the state authorities is in the United States of America much more developed than in Europe. The The mistrust of normal American citizens to their government is very strong, by different reasons. The Eastern Coast Democrats, by individual rights standards, they mistrust to the government, and the East Coast Republicans because they think the state is superfluent. But both tendencies have a lot of skepticism to their authorities. So you will find in the United States always interlocutors for privacy and for data protection rights. And that's what we have to do. We just are on the way to adopt a directive of data protection for the European Union, and I'm in favor to introduce this in the negotiation about the free trade agreement with the Americans.
Algo más sobre el caso de...
Anything else about the espionage case?
Yeah, one thing. In my country, in Germany, there was a big scandal that now Angela Merkel was spied. I think this is absolutely inadmissible, unacceptable. But I was also a little bit surprised when in the summer 2013, we discovered via the publication of Mr. Snowden that millions and millions of normal citizens in Germany are listened by the CIA. It was on page 3 of the newspapers. And now it is the Chancellor, and it is the big scandal. It is a scandal that the German Chancellor is spied, but it is also a scandal that ordinary citizens are spied by the Americans. And therefore it should not be only a scandal if a head of a government is under such scrutiny and observation. It is the right to be protected of every single citizen. Therefore, the scandal for me is not only the spying to heads of government, it is this mass spying to every citizen with the justification terror, fight against terrorism. Look, the journalist of The Guardian who published, the British newspaper who published the papers of Mr. Snowden. The journalist who did it is living with a partner, a Brazilian man, who has nothing to do with The Guardian and with Mr. Snowden. But this man was arrested on the airport Heathrow in London for 9 hours because he is the partner of a journalist who has contacts to Mr. Snowden, justification, fight against terrorism. 9 hours. I think this is what we have to fight against. That ordinary citizens are taken from a principled point of view as suspicious. This is the wrong way in democracy.
Enrique Domenech says the human rights ruling of the Parrot doctrine for common criminals in Spain has caused an enormous social alarm in Spain, and many citizens, especially the victims, have begun to criticize the Strasbourg ruling. What do you think about this situation where a European institution has let down the expectations of the victims and makes the impartiality of the court, in doubt?
You will for sure understand that the president of a European institution cannot comment the judgment of a European court. This is, for me, from an institutional point of view, impossible. Therefore, I ask the respect I have to spend institutionally to the court. The only observation I can make is I understand the legal interpretation, but I understand also the feeling of victims.
Miquel Llavina.
Miquel Llavina says 7.5 million citizens in Europe, Catalans, want to have a consultation, a democratic consultation about the possibility of becoming independent and having a direct relationship with the European Union. Can they be threatened with being expelled from the European Union overnight based on the outcome of that consultation? And Carlos Silva says that what is your opinion concerning the consequences, the legal consequences of the secession of a part of the country, one of the member states? What would be the status of the new nation as compared to the European Union? And another question, when Catalonia becomes independent, do you think it would be able to be a member state if it doesn't have an army? And César Martínez asks if you agree with the warning of the socialist group in the European Parliament, Hans Svoboda. According to him, Catalonia cannot create new conflicts and expect to create these conflicts and expect it to be welcomed into the European Union. He threatens that if they split from the Spanish, there's not an agreement with the Spanish government, then they would be expelled from the European Union.
You can imagine that I'm really deeply surprised about the question. I didn't expect that such questions would come up here. All the questions are extremely delicate for me to answer. Listen, whatever I will answer now, half of your country will say this is a man against us, and the other half will say also this is a man acting against our interest. So what should I do? I'm a little bit in a situation like this Jewish rabbi. What's in English? Rabbiner. Rabbi? Rabbiner in English. What's that? Rabbi. There was a rabbi who had a neighbor, and the neighbor came to him and complained. And he said to him, "You are right." And this neighbor complained about his neighbor. And now the next day, the neighbor, who was the target of the complaint, came and complained against the first one. And the rabbi said, "You are right." And then they had lunch. And his wife said to him, "Rabbi, you cannot give right to the one and right to the other." And he said, "You are right." So this is a little bit the situation in which a European politician is. Therefore, if you have other questions to raise, I would not be disappointed. Yeah, I can't give an answer to you to the question you raised. And to be honest, I answered I don't know how much times. Last time I gave a big interview to a newspaper here, to La Vanguardia, where I answered all these questions. The European Union will not and cannot solve the problem. This is not a problem. We can contribute with whatever to a solution. This is a problem you must find within the country and not on the European level. I know that this is always a disappointment. If in Madrid people are urging me to tell to you something, they want that I pass as a message to you, and I tell them, please, this is a problem you have to solve here. They tell me then, you are on the side of the Catalonians. So if I tell this here, please, this is a problem, they say me, you are not in favor of us. So what shall I do? Tell me. I have no solution as a President of the European Parliament for these very delicate, difficult questions. These are difficult questions. I discuss it with my colleagues in the European Parliament, with the Catalonian colleagues in the European Parliament every day. I understand more or less everything, and as you perhaps saw, I'm a man who is reading and reading a lot about history, who is reading even more than you perhaps imagine, and since a very long time, especially Catalan literature. I was a big admirer of Josep Pla when this man was completely unknown in Germany. I understand, or I try to understand, history culture, and individual and collective feelings related to history and culture. I try to understand it, and I think I understand it. But there are moments in political life where politicians should admit that they have no solutions. And I belong to those who tell you, for this problem, I can make no single proposal to find a solution. And I repeat, I know that it is not satisfying for a lot of people, but it is the reality.
Alicia Puertolas.
Alicia Portola says, Mr. President, you have been elected, you've been chosen as the socialist candidate to the presidency of the European Commission. Don't you think that the voting may be less important from the democratic and popular, from the social democrat and the popular groups? And will it be difficult to govern the European institutions? What do you think about the Barroso's period and the work done by Van Rompuy? What are your emphasis? What are your main proposals for changing this?
Yeah. Listen, I'm not here to make judgments about José Manuel Barroso and not about Herman Van Rompuy. And if they were here, sitting on my place, I would be happy if they would not make comments about me and my behavior. Because from an institutional point of view, the European Union is not a federal state, where José Manuel Barroso is the Prime Minister and I'm the President of the Parliament. Or Herman Van Rompuy is a kind of king or whatever. We are three institutions, Council, Commission and Parliament, on equal level, and I think it is not my duty to make comments about my colleagues. There is, by the way, one reason why I will not answer to the question. José Manuel Barroso, Herman Van Rompuy and I myself, we have the common duty to bring as soon as possible in close and mutual trust, in close cooperation and mutual trust, the European Union out of the crisis. I think everybody who knows Herman Van Rompuy, José Manuel Barroso and me can easily feel that there is not a deep kind of love between us. We are different characters and we have different political opinions. But I must tell to you, José Manuel Barroso and I, we met since 2004 as strong political opponents. I was the man leading the no vote against José Manuel Barroso 2004 and 2009 as the leader of the socialist group in the European Parliament. And nevertheless, he got 2 times he was elected. And if I would tell you my life as a group leader with a parliamentarian group to run, prepared to run against Barroso, and a lot of social democratic prime ministers, including of this country, supporting him, and the split in my parliamentarian group about that question, yes or no to Barroso, these are most difficult moments of my political life, to keep a group together where half is in favor and half against the President of the Commission. Nevertheless, I must admit that between José Manuel and me, despite a lot of different opinions in politics, there is an enormous mutual respect. I respect, and I repeat, despite a lot of different opinions, I have to spend my highest personal appreciation to him. He's an honest man. I found him often wrong. And some of the decision of the Commission I would never support. But on a personal level, I must spend the highest appreciation to him because he is an honest person. And therefore, I want to ask you to accept that I can't say more. Another thing is what I do different, what I propose as different projects of the Commission in the next period. There is one point. In case I would have an influence on the next Commission, my first suggestion is that the European Commission should, from a principal point of view, change its strategy. For the time being, my feeling is the Commission is asking always first, what can we draw on our level? With a tendency to harmonize things, which makes at the end a lot of problems and anger to citizens against the European Union. If we would start with the strategy of the Commission to ask what can first done better locally, regionally and nationally, and to leave it there. And if we see it can neither be done better locally, regionally or nationally, then the Union should interfere. If we change from a principal point of view the behavior, the interpretation of subsidiarity, that local regional solutions are always, if they are possible, better than these global solutions, because as nearer to the citizens a decision is made, as better it is, because the feeling of citizens to influence the situation directly gives him higher legitimacy and higher acceptance. Therefore, if I could influence the Commission, my recommendation would be, this is the major change. Let's interfere when local, regional and national solutions are not longer possible, but not earlier.
Muchas gracias. En nombre de las entidades que hacen.
Thank you very much. On behalf of all of the institutions that make this possible, Mr. Luis Pinos is going to close this this breakfast. Well, good morning to everyone. I would just like, on behalf of Banco Santander, Asistencia Sanitaria and Red Eléctrica, to thank Mr. Martin Schulz. Thank you very much for your presence here with us today. Thank you also to Mr. Salana for the excellent presentation that he has made of Martin Schulz. Thank you. And Mr. Martin Schulz today has given us an enthusiastic defense of what he sees the European Commission can do for Europeans. What is it the European Union can do for the Europeans for solving our crisis, for moving forward and getting out of this crisis. And it has been a very interesting presentation. Thank you, Mr. Schulz, and thank you all for your attendance here. Thank you.